There he is.
Every time I we're about to give up on you, Charles.
Well, actually, we were wondering if we were in the right class.
He's not hearing us.
I don't know.
Yeah,
His mic-
I'm
Oh,
here.
okay. Okay.
Okay.
You. I'm not sure you're hearing me yet.
Yeah, we hear
No,
you
we
now.
hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. Yeah, I was sitting out there in Zoom land. Nobody was there. And I was like, what's going on? So I stopped it and restarted it, and there you all are. You know, because I was looking at my phone and it said, okay, there's people on Zoom. Okay, where are you?
Uh-huh.
Right.
Yeah, we were thinking we had the wrong link and you were in a different room or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't,
Uh,
I mean, I clicked on, start the meeting, and at that time it showed that just Naomi was on. Well, I was sitting there watching the phone, and then John, you came on, and then Richard, and then Veronica came on, and then like, okay, where is everybody? So it's kind of like, okay, I'm on Zoom. Where are they?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, oh, okay. So yeah,
It's crazy.
yeah, it was time to do something different, and kind of
Yeah.
restart it.
Right.
Anyway, we found each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yay! Okay.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'm not out here all by myself now. At any rate, how's everybody doing? It's Wednesday.
Good.
Doing good. Fine.
Okay. All right. I mean, other than the technical aspects of, Zoom doing weird things,
Right.
yeah, I think it's okay. At any rate, got a couple things I want to share with you today. And I'm going to start off. I don't know that I'm hoping maybe we'll have a few more people show up. Hey, John,
Yes.
you're a big watercolor guy. Okay.
That's so it's been said.
Yes. Anyway, well, it is your media of preference. And
Yes.
and then of course Naomi likes to use acrylics and watercolors as well. Anyway, I want to share with you a couple of the watercolors I've done lately. Okay. And then we'll get into some videos that have nothing to do with watercolor. But since I've been playing with watercolor, I figured, and I finished up a couple of things yesterday. I figured I would share them with you.
Do you like the medium as opposed to oil?
I like some things about it. Other things, not so much. Obviously it's like once you put something down, it's
Yes.
not going to go away.
Right.
That part I don't really like about it. But
So this
other
is
than that,
watercolor?
yeah, this is watercolor.
Wow.
Yeah, that's very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was I had taken a photograph of several of the plants and flowers when I was standing out there by the road painting in West Virginia. And I decided, yeah, I need to make a painting, kind of a more botanical type of painting, of all these different flowers and different plants and shapes and things like that. And so, yeah, I've been working on this. I guess I've been working on it. Not that I spent a month working on it, but it's taken me about a month from the time I started it, to now to actually finish.
Let me ask you, the leafless tree in the upper left, did you paint over or around that? How did you get affected?
Yeah, I painted it over the background.
Okay.
And I used it's watercolor, it's China white. I didn't use gouache or anything with it. It was just
Okay, so it's more opaque.
Pardon? Yeah.
It's a little more opaque than.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. But the thing with China white is it's really not opaque. It's not like gouache. So whatever you put it over,
Yes.
it's going to, whatever color's underneath it, it's going to soak into a little bit, which in a way is kind of a good thing because it softens, there's no absolute white on it. Where gouache, if you laid it on there, it would be pretty much so stark white.
Right.
But and this is, it's pretty good size. It's I want to say it's about a 20, like about a 20, almost 20 by 28 watercolor pad. And I'm using probably 4/5 of the page, so it's got like about a 2-inch border all the way around. And I want to say it's 180 pound. I didn't stretch it, I was able to actually paint it, and it really didn't buckle or.
Yeah, you get the 180, yeah, that usually, I use that sparingly because it's more expensive.
Yeah, well, I've got 3 or 4 pads of it, but I mean, in using it, it performed and handled really nicely. Now, this particular 180 pound is what you would call a plate finish, so it really doesn't have any bumps or anything. It's a very smooth surface. It's not hard like a hot press, but it
Okay,
is, it's very smooth, so it doesn't have like a lot of texture to it.
so it's more toward like a multimedia paper, a little more smooth than an actual watercolor paper.
Well, they do make watercolor, plate finish watercolor papers, and that's kind of what this is.
Okay,
Now I had a smaller pad, and I've been trying different papers. Okay, so all of these are not on the same paper. This piece, which was, again, it's a fairly plate finish, and it's a much smaller pad. But the thing I noticed about it was, anytime it got wet, it started buckling and wrinkling. And again, I didn't stretch any of these.
yeah,
I just kind of worked directly, wet into wet, or dry brush, or whatever technique I used. It was really just straight on the paper, and I didn't bother to stretch it. In the beginning, it wasn't too bad, but by the time I got finished, it was pretty wavy, and I really didn't, like that about this particular paper. And if I were going to do more pieces on this paper, I would definitely put it on a board and tape it, wet it,
right.
tape it, stretch it, and treat it kind of the way they tell you need to, treat watercolor paper.
So was this 400 pound?
Is this what?
400 pound?
No. This is probably, I think they're all about 160 to 180. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. I mean, I've got 3 pads, and I think they're all around about 160 to 180, and they're all, well, yeah. 2 of them, are this kind of plate, very smooth finish.
okay,
And then I've got 2 that are, they've got a little bit of texture, to the paper. They're more what you would think of as traditional watercolor paper.
right.
But they're still not like rough. I've got a block of like really, truly rough watercolor paper as well. And I don't use it often just because it's a little too rough for my liking.
And if they're too rough, it's hard to control sometimes.
I mean, if you're
disperses.
doing like almost like really abstract type stuff, or very, very loose type stuff, I think it works well. But yeah, I don't generally work that way. So,
Right.
I like shapes and cleaner edges and things. So I tend to go more toward the plate finish. At any rate, And yesterday, when you showed me your watercolor, the farm scene,
Right.
I looked at
Right.
it and said, that's pretty darn close to what I'm doing.
Yeah, right.
And it really is, you know, it's pretty similar. But you know, in working with this, and this was up in West Virginia. It was either in Virginia or West Virginia, because I was right there on the state line, both sides. Anyway, yeah, when I started this, when I went up there, and I didn't finish it, so I worked on it over the last couple of weeks, off and on, again, just kind of working and building it up slowly. You know, as a media, as a sketching sort of media, I mean, I do like watercolor. And the thing I guess I like about it is you do actually have a great deal of control over the color,
Yes.
and the contrast, because unlike oils and acrylics, those usually go down and they're really pretty strong, right at the first pass. And then you're spending your time modifying them and taking them back, and getting them to a more natural feeling color. With watercolor, it's just the opposite. You put the color down, at first you think it's probably too bright and too strong. And by the time that it really dries, it's nowhere close. And so you have to build it up and work in layers. And I'm okay with that. I
Yep.
like actually working that way. I probably get a little too futzy with it, but this was fun to do. I mean, I really wanted to paint that big kind of gold, tree there. And that was kind of the thing that caught my attention when I started this.
Yeah, that's very nice.
Yeah. Here's the roses, and this is after I wet the one in the back.
Yeah, yes, I remember. This is
Yeah, and so it just kind of softened it back a little bit.
right.
And yeah, I'm fine with it now. I'm much happier with it.
Yes.
I could probably go and play with sharpening up some of the shapes, like in the leaves that are down below the rose in the front here, to help pull those forward a little bit more.
Yep.
But I'm not so sure how much I really want to play with this, how much more I really want to play with this. I probably will, though. I'll probably go back in.
That's we get to that point where we start overworking it.
Yeah, that would be very easy to do. And I've been guilty of doing that.
Yes.
It's happened more than once in my life. So
Yes.
yeah, I know all about that. Speaking of overworking things, this was just something I did kind of on a lark. And it's a more of a design piece. It's my little signature, my little shop.
Right.
And I put some arts and crafts sort of elements in there. And again, this is all in watercolor, including the gold. That gold is a metallic. And that's that metallic gold that I got out of Japan that I ordered online. And I love that stuff. It is just amazing to work with.
Wow.
It's really, really metallic. And this photograph doesn't do it justice. But it really is this very, very bright gold. And, to see this piece, in real life and be able to look at it at different angles and get the reflectiveness off of it, it really gives it a nice effect,
So it's pretty reflective.
Yeah, it's very reflective. I mean, it looks, I mean, it really does look, like metal,
Wow.
and very, very reflective. It's so reflective, in fact, that, when you're looking at it, you can actually, in the gold areas itself, you can actually see, shifts in color and value in
Wow.
the gold. because
Wow.
it's actually reflecting what's in the room.
Right.
It's really nice stuff. I love that stuff. But there's just, you know, I haven't been able to ever find any way to take a metallic like that and actually photograph it and be able to catch, you know, some of that in the photograph.
Right.
You know, it just doesn't pick up. I'm really actually surprised that the photo that I'm showing you right now came out as well as it did. You know, I've tried photographing some metallics, and what generally happens with those is, you know, they end up looking really dark rather than reflective for whatever reason. But this one, you know, at least it looks gold, and yeah, pretty happy with that. So anyway, you know, I told you guys that, you know, I was playing with some watercolor, and that's what I've been doing lately, and I'm having fun with it. You know, it's you know, it's different than acrylic or oil, and you know, it's not a bad medium, you know, to work with. So, you know, it's still the same thing that I keep talking about, though. It's the the key factor in watercolor isn't even the quality of the watercolor, the actual paint. It's the quality of the paint of the paper that you work on.
Definitely, yes.
That just, it really just does make all the difference in the world, you know. And if I had to give anybody some advice with watercolor, it's like, yeah, you know, go out and buy cheap watercolor sets. Those are fine, but spend your money on the paper, because it just, yeah, there's no comparison.
No.
Anyway, all right. So moving on, we are going to, let's see. Oh, well, here. Let's not do that. I have to go and find, I don't know where it went to, but yeah, I gotta go find the YouTube page. There we go. Okay, I got it. Good. All right. So now I can share something with you. All right. Yeah, there we go. Okay. All right. I want to introduce you to a couple of different artists, okay, today. And we're just going to look at their work. And then I kind of wanted to talk about them and a little bit about their careers. And kind of, you know, where they sit in the universe of, you know, artists. Now, these are all classical artists. And, you know, we talk a lot about the Salon in Paris, right? And, you know, about, you know, what a force they were before the Impressionists came along. But, you know, other than maybe Bouguereau, you know, we really haven't looked at, you know, a lot of artists who were members of the Salon. Well, this is Le Breuve. And he's very much so, he was a contemporary of Bouguereau. And he painted very much so in that style. So can you guys see the can you see the video screen?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, but it's small.
yes.
Right.
Okay, now if I, you know, because we've been having some issues with this, okay? So if I make this full size, is it full screen now?
No,
No. Yeah. Okay. Why has this got to be so difficult? I don't know. It's crazy. I might have to reload Zoom or update it or do something. I don't know. Okay, so I'm back to you know, just the regular size screen. What are you guys seeing?
Yeah, it's just, it's the full screen with the sidebar and the comments below.
Okay, but I opened the screen out to take up.
Yeah, it is a little bigger. It's bigger than it was, yes.
Okay, all right, that's kind of what I wanted to know. Okay. All right, so let's play this thing and see what it says. It's not going to say much, actually. It's just music. And let's turn up the volume. They seem to have a lot of repeats in here for some reason. Okay. Let's stop that real quick. Any thoughts about his stuff?
Very representative of the period, I think.
Yeah, he was definitely, he was definitely a academic, painter. Let me stop this.
Is that all he ever did was figures, or was, anything else?
Well, yeah, he did some portraiture, but that was the thing with the salon. You did one of three things. Okay, you did these. Well, the main thing was called historical paintings. Okay, and the salon was all about elevating the ideals of the Greek and the Roman Republic, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Greek democracy and the Roman Republic, and the art that they produced. And of course, they're kind of all the same thing because the Romans basically copied the Greeks. They said, "Hey, we like Greek art, and we're going to make all of our art look like theirs." And if they didn't come take it directly out of the Greeks themselves, then the artisans that they had working in Rome reproduced it, and that style, pretty much so. And so, the salon was pretty much so a carryover from that. Now, they didn't have, at the time, they really didn't have a lot of art that survived the Dark Ages, after the fall of Rome. A lot of those cities were buried and things like that. And there were paintings, done during the time of Rome, but again, none of them really survived. The only thing that really survived as far as an actual color image were the mosaics and the frescoes, of which, there were very few examples of, and now today, a lot of those cities like Herculaneum, Pompeii, even parts of Naples, have all been unburied. And one of the fortunate, I suppose we could call it fortunate, things about being buried in volcanic ash is that a lot of those buildings, the walls were still intact, and once they uncovered them, those frescoes were still there. And much to everyone's real surprise in the archaeological and the art community, is how elaborate some of those frescoes were in pretty much so average people's homes. It was a big part of the culture, and some of them were pretty elaborate and pretty well painted. The Brev and the Salon didn't have access to any of that at that point in time. They had a few examples to go out, off of, but it was mainly the Roman and Greek sculpture that they, and the architecture that they really looked at and admired. But if you look at his work in particular, you can really see that like he and Bouguereau were, doing very much so the same things. In fact, you can, there's a difference, there's a difference in sort of the range of value and the way that they rendered the human form. And, most people right now, I would say that Bouguereau is more in favor, and, as far as our modern taste goes. And if they talk about anybody from the Salon, Bouguereau is probably one of the one of the main artists that they talk about, and Lebrev not so much these days. But regardless, I mean, he was an excellent painter. He really was, and a really good technician, good at composition and design. And he really had this ability to sort of get this sort of translucency to the skin, you know, when he painted a portrait or a human form. And probably, I would say, better than Bouguereau, you know, in that regard. Okay. They each had their strengths and weaknesses, but Lebrev in particular, it's like, you know, when he paints human skin, it glows. You know, there was this, you know, it's like you could feel the light. And like in this particular example, when you really look at, you know, her front torso, and this is probably not a great reproduction of this painting, but I've seen this painting in life before. It hangs in the Louvre, and you know, he really understood the anatomy, but he also, it's just like there was something about the way he painted it, and it just radiates light, a lot like the Mona Lisa does. You know, so this was a traditional process painting, and there's lots and lots of layers of glazes and things built up over it. And you know, it's not like real directly painted. It's not an alla prima. And so, you know, he gets all these really soft, you know, sort of transitions and subtleties, you know, in the skin surface that you can't get really with doing alla prima. So, and again, you know, the overall effect is that it's like the figure just sort of glows, you know, because of the light traveling through the layers of paint and then, you know, bouncing back out. It's almost like a stained glass window. Yeah. And again, you know, really lovely work. He tended to work relatively large. You know, some of these pieces were, you know, 3, 4, 5 feet across, you know, and you know, pretty good sized canvases generally. You know, he didn't do a lot of tiny, small little paintings. So.
All his rendering of fabrics are excellent.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, again, you know, that was something about the salon. They were really, really big on capturing, you know, what fabric did as it wrapped around the human form, and the quality of it. How reflective was it? How soft or how hard was it? And the same thing with, you know, architecture and all the background elements, like this wooden screen back there. You know, it's pretty elaborate. And in fact, you know, in my judgment, in looking at this particular painting, I would say he really enjoyed painting that screen, because that's the thing you seem to focus on. You know, it seems to be sharper and kind of a more interesting shape than even the figures themselves. Let's see. Yeah. Of course, you know, women in ridiculous hats were sort of the, you know, one of the subjects. It's almost like, you know, they folded something and just put it on this lady's head. You know, it doesn't really look like a hat that would stay on your head.
Well, it looks like she went into the church and had to cover her head, because a lot of those other paintings were girls praying in churches and prayer books.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like she went into the church and didn't have a head covering, so she threw a towel over her.
Yeah, or something. Yeah. Yeah. And here's one of the, you know, when you look at the composition on this, you know, it's one of those things that, you know, generally today they'd say, don't do that, right? And if you look at where she's positioned in the canvas, her head is really, right in the center, left to right. But, with her hand up like that, it makes it very tight over on the left-hand side. And then there's this big void to the right. And compositionally, I think most instructors or whatever would, sort of encourage you to not do that,
Right.
but in fact, move her figure over to the right so that she has more kind of an open space that she's looking into, on the left. And it would feel, a little less squeezed, and uncomfortable. So,
That is the name Loretta, is that his, is that in the painting?
yeah, it is. But yeah, I think that's who the girl was.
Right, so I mean, he did it, it's not as superimposed.
No. He wrote that on the canvas. Yeah. And that was not an uncommon thing to do. In fact, there were several artists in the salon, and they would almost like in Roman numeral or letter forms, put a band across the top of the painting, with the sitter's name. And that was a very common, portrait thing to do around that period of time, really from like, I would say the late 1700s all the way through to about, the early 1900s. And you see that even today, with some contemporary portrait painters, where they've picked that up and continued that, that approach, in as part of their portraiture as well. They usually make that lettering, very subtle, but it's there and very clear. So, there's no doubt about who the sitter was. I tend not to do that. I figure I struggle enough, with trying to get a likeness of somebody and really feel like, okay, yeah, I've got who they are, and then to have to go back and hand letter, in these, very sort of tight, clean Roman sort of letter forms. Yeah. No, thank you. Not what I want to do. So I'll try to find some examples of that and show you guys. It's okay, go back. Trying to get a, yeah. Now this is actually one of his most famous paintings.
Yeah, I think I've seen this one.
Yeah, I think most people have. This is Lady Godiva. And when he painted this, there was a huge uproar in the salon at the time, because the lady that he used, the model, there was kind of a story behind her. She was not a nobody. She was fairly well known, and he painted her, and she was very recognizable. And all of Paris was kind of up in arms because here she is sitting naked. It caused almost as much stir as Sargent did with Madame X.
Oh, wow.
And that's one of the dangers. Is like when you hire a model, and you paint them very accurately to who they are, and there's somebody who's obviously recognizable, that's that can be, that can work against you sometimes. So just keep that in mind. Let's see. I keep hitting these sort of transitions. There we go. Okay. That's not the one I wanted. I wanted the other one. We need to go the other one. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there's another one of those, women praying. And again, the name, up in the upper left-hand corner. So. Now, this is another one of his that's, really pretty easily recognized. And remember, the time when this was painted, he was working during the time that the Impressionists were working. And one of the things that really influenced the Impressionists was all of these Japanese prints and all of this artwork and the silk and the fabrics and these, in Paris, it was a big deal, for women to buy these kimonos, from Japan. There was a big export business. I guess Japan felt like they had too many kimonos, so they shipped a lot of them to Europe. At any rate, they were all the rage, kind of around about I say 1860s, 1870s. And so a lot of artists, Impressionists and, more academic and traditional artists, painting a lot of women in a lot of different kimonos. Obviously, she is not Japanese, but yeah, this is one of his, one of his more famous paintings. I've seen this one many, many, many times. Oh, there we go, hitting the transition point again. Yeah. Now there's a rondo, okay, or a tondo. Yeah, tondo. It's a round canvas, okay, or a rounded oval canvas, and that was popular in the day as well. Now today, if you wanted to paint something like that, you would buy a rectangular canvas, but you would buy the frame, and the frame would, it'd be a rectangular frame, but it would have a window open in it. There would be an oval or a round, and that's kind of how we treat it today. Back then, they would actually make frames to fit those canvases. So you would have a oval frame as well as an oval canvas. There we go. Maybe a little further back. Okay. Yeah. Now, out of all of the paintings that he did, this is actually one of my favorites, that he's done. There's something about, how he captured just sort of this quiet expression on this woman's face, the light and the shadow. It's really, really nice. And then, with the little, it's morning glories, as a laurel or whatever around her head. But just really,
that's the entire painting, not just a blob or a portion of it.
No, that's it. Yeah, that's the whole thing. And this one was not very big. This was not like one of his big paintings. But it's just really nicely painted, and I like, the range of value. If you look at the hand in particular, and you compare it to the face, notice the difference in temperature, right? The hand being so much cooler in temperature than the face itself, which is kind of glowing and warm, kind of a generally orange undertone. And then the hand, these cooler sort of pinks. So yeah, definitely a temperature and a value shift in there, but really nicely done. So, at any rate, anybody got any questions about his stuff, comments? No? Okay. All right, so moving on. This is Sororio. And we looked at some of his stuff last week. But we're going to look at it a little more.
Have you ever heard of Sorolla? Well, if you were in New York in 1908, you could have queued round the block to see his exhibition. But after his death in 1923, he started to go out of fashion and never returned to fashion, although perhaps the exhibition of his work at the National Gallery in London in 2019 will help to reinstate him as one of the greatest Spanish artists. Joaquim Sorolla y Bastida was born in Valencia, where many of his beach scenes were painted. This photograph is his house in Madrid, which is also the museum of his work. And I took the photograph a few years ago, and that's when I was first introduced to his work. This is Sorolla. It's a self-portrait that he painted when he was 41. Notice the intensity of his gaze. He is an artist that paints what he sees and has been described as the Spanish artist with a photographer's eye. He painted from life rather than from photographs, and he painted many aspects of Spain, the country, and its customs. He was orphaned when he was 2. Both of his parents died in the 1865 cholera epidemic, and he was brought up by his uncle, who was a blacksmith. His uncle luckily recognized his talent and encouraged him to go to drawing classes, which he did at a local trade school. And by the age of 15, he could bash out a still life in the style of the masters. His talent was recognized early on, and he exhibited in Madrid in his early teens. And his first large history painting was bought by the Spanish government before he was even 21. He had an extraordinary technical ability. He can represent any figure, texture, object, fall of light that he wishes to, as we'll see in the paintings. But he started out slightly differently. This painting is called Another Marguerite. He saw a woman being transported to prison in a third-class carriage when he was traveling between Madrid and Valencia. So it's based on experience, although what he did is he actually hired a railway carriage and used models when he painted the picture to get the details right. Note the shackles on her wrist. She's a prisoner being transported to prison, and it's an image of suffering and despair. The title, Another Marguerite, refers to the woman in Goethe's play Faust, who Faust, with the help of the devil, seduces the innocent Marguerite, who is sometimes, her name is abbreviated to Gretchen in the play. And she gives birth to a child that eventually she drowns, the illegitimate child, and is convicted of murder. So it's this reference to Goethe's play was added later by Sorolla. The painting was exhibited in Madrid, where it was awarded a gold medal, and it was then sent to Chicago to the World Fair in 1893, where it won first prize. And it was bought by the Washington Museum in St. Louis, which is where it still is. As a result of this painting and others, he rose to fame and was regarded as the leading Spanish painter. He decided that early on that he was going to be a famous artist, not just in Spain, not just in Europe, but worldwide. So he had big ambitions and painted modern themes like this one and exhibited at world fairs to consciously become famous on the world stage. From the 1890s, he's work was exhibited at an endless series of international exhibitions. He was commissioned for portraits, honours were showered upon him, and he travelled ceaselessly. So by 1900, he was considered the most famous of all living Spanish artists. This painting's called "And They Still Say Fish is Expensive." It shows a scene inside a fishing boat where a young boy has been seriously injured. The young boy is wearing a medallion, a good luck medallion around his neck, while his shoulders are held by one fisherman and the other applies a wet compress to his stomach, which is soaked in the pail of water in the foreground. Around them, they're surrounded by fishing tackle. In the background, there's a pile of fish that they caught during the unfortunate day's work. It's a work that, like the previous work, is making a moral point where it got a lot of favourable publicity, different from his later paintings. The title is taken from the final passage of a novel called The Mayflower, which was published about the same time. And in the novel, it's about the novel's about the wretched lives of fishermen. And it does end with a story which is similar to the accident that is shown depicted here by Sorolla. This is called The Return from Fishing, but unlike the previous painting, it doesn't make a moral point. It's showing the sort of scene Sorolla would have been very familiar with. He was it was painted in Valencia, and he was born and grew up in Valencia, so he was very familiar with these beach scenes. This notice this is a very large painting. It's 4 meters wide, and the oxen who are pulling in the fishing boat are life size. He painted it in 1894 when he was 31, and it was exhibited in Paris and won a second-class medal, which was a remarkable achievement for a foreign artist. And it was bought by the French state from the exhibition for 6,000 francs. It was an immediate success among conservative critics who admired its technical prowess. They commented on the contrast between the dark oxen and the bright sea, the accuracy of the semi-transparent sail, and notice there the way that he's handled the color contrast between the buttery yellow sail that's backlit by the sun alongside the dirty blue of the sail where it's in partial shade. It was these technical skills were, as I said, much admired by critics at the time. He was following in the academic tradition with a well-balanced composition, high finish, restrained colors, but accurate representation of colors, shapes, forms, and so on. The success of the previous painting and the positive critical reaction led him to paint many variations over the next few years. This is Beaching the Boat, Afternoon Light, which he painted 3 years later. Although in reproduction it looks similar to the previous painting, it's actually much more dynamically painted. It's a bravura paint performance. It's paint dashed onto the canvas, as you can see if you look closely. He used a wide variety of colors, a wide variety of brush strokes, from small to broad. The paint is dabbed in places, smeared, scrawled onto the canvas. Sorolla is obviously much more confident in this painting, much more free and relaxed in its production. And although it looks like a sketch, it's a very large painting. It's 4.4 meters. It's larger than the previous painting we saw. It's in some places, you can see the canvas coming through. In other places, it's thick impasto paint. Sorolla painted some of these, he did a lot of sketching, a lot of planning, but he also painted directly from life. And he would take his easel and canvas and paints onto the beach, as we'll see in the next painting. A final beach scene for now. It's called Afternoon at the Beach in Valencia. And he's adopted a high viewpoint, looking down at some boys playing in the sea, looking down so that the horizon is above the top of the painting. So all we see is the sea, a little bit in the foreground of some rocks. And at the top of the picture, the umbrella or parasol that he would sit under while he was painting for hours in the midday sun on the beach. The picture shows us some boys playing, and it's painted even more freely than the last picture, what you might call an impressionistic style. He wrote to a friend that he intended this as a study in light, and in the letter he went on to quote Monet, "We painters, however, can never reproduce sunlight as it really is. I can only approach the truth of it," which is what we see him doing here. In fact, Monet, Degas, and Rodin probably saw this painting when it was exhibited, and we don't know what they thought of it. We do know Degas stared intently at each of Sorolla's paintings in turn and then left without saying a word. I'm not sure what the significance of that is. A very well-known painting by Sorolla called Sewing the Sail. Again, it was painted in Valencia, this time in a hut near the beach. We can see the sea through the door in the background. This perhaps is Sorolla's most complex representation of light. As the sun filters through the trellis, we get patches of light on the sail that's being sewn, some of it in shadow, some of it in bright sunlight, some of it direct sun, some of it in indirect sun. We get patches of cream and grey. In fact, Sorolla was aware of the complexity of the painting. He wrote to a friend, "I'm not sending you any photographs because they do not do justice to its tonal relations. You have to see the painting to appreciate the play of light and the way that he's captured it." It's got a conventional pyramidal composition, but the figures unusually are pushed to the background, and what dominates is the sail itself. It was exhibited at the Paris Salon, where it won first prize, and it won first prize in Munich and Vienna. Although when it was exhibited in Madrid, some critics felt it didn't have a strong composition, perhaps because the figures were pushed to the background, and they were also concerned that there wasn't any moral or spiritual message behind the painting. In 1905, it was exhibited at the Venice Biennale, where it was very well received and was in fact bought by Venice itself, and it's still there. This is the last of his big paintings with a social theme. It's called Sad Inheritance, and it shows a group of disabled, blind and deaf young boys on the beach being led to the sea, excuse me, by the monk that looks after them. It was sent to the 1900 Paris Universal Exhibition, where it won the Grand Prix and initiated huge discussion at the time. The painting beat Whistler, Klimt and Elmer Tadema at the exhibition in Paris. It's still, in fact, controversial today. It was placed at one point in a church in New York as a form of altarpiece demonstrating an act of charity. However, it was never bought by the Spanish state, perhaps because it highlights the disabilities of some of its young Spanish citizens. As I said, although it was the last of the big paintings with a social theme, it was one of many paintings that he continued to paint of people and children playing on the beach, one of his favourite subjects, as we'll see. But by this time, by 1899, his career was changing, because by this time he was happily married. In 1888, when he was 25, he returned to Valencia to marry Clotilde, who he'd first met in 1879 while he was working in his father's studio.
18.
Sorry, in her father's studio. She became his muse and the subject of many of his paintings, and they had a happy marriage and a passionate relationship. When he was away from her, which happened often as he travelled the world, he would write every day, often enclosing a flower. In one of his letters he wrote, "All my love is focused on you. You are my body, my life, my mind, my perpetual ideal." By 1895, when this was painted, they'd had 3 children together: Maria, born in 1890, Joachim, born in 1892, and Eleanor, shown here, his youngest daughter, born in 1895. In 1890, they moved to Madrid, where for the next 10 years, Sorolla spent his time focused mainly on the production of large canvases, oriental themes, mythological, historical, and social subjects, with the intent to display them in salons, international exhibitions all around the world: Madrid, Paris, Venice, Munich, Berlin, Chicago, and so on. He had a happy marriage. The biographer's curse, it's often said: no mistresses, no hidden secrets, as far as we know. What we see here is his wife, Clotilde, and his youngest daughter, Eleanor. Originally, when he painted it, his wife's head was turned the other way, but around 1900, about 5 years after he first painted it, he rethought the picture and painted her head round the other way to look at the baby. It's a master work in white. The white bedclothes, the grey walls enable Sorolla to experiment with shades of white, perhaps inspired by Whistler's Symphony in White #1, The White Girl. The white and the sleeping baby signify purity, but I think he avoids sentimentality by the unusual composition and the technical virtuosity. Our eye is drawn to the handling of so many shades of white rather than from the sentimental appearance of mother and child. Incidentally, his daughter Eleanor grew up to become a Spanish sculptor and painter herself, and after a brief career, she left art behind to dedicate herself to her family after her marriage. Sorolla saw himself as participating in the great Spanish tradition. And when he was in England, he went to see the Rokeby Venus, which at the time was a rugby park in County Durham, by Diego Velázquez, also called the Toilet of Venus. He studied the picture and he realized that he could take on Velázquez. So he painted this, which is modeled by his wife. Because it's his wife, he never showed it in public as a portrait, but he did exhibit it in 1909, called simply Female Nude, but he never sold it. It's interesting comparing him to Velázquez, perhaps the greatest Spanish painter. Towards the end of his life, he admitted that how tired he felt and how he wanted to go further. He wrote, "Anxiety is what most consumes me in life. I don't have Velázquez's phlegm. Maybe that is where his perfection and my lack of it lies."
Okay, I want to stop here just for a second. Real carefully, take a look at how he used color in here. And you know, it's that kind of the pinks and the reds and things against these little accents of, you know, kind of a grayish green and blue. So there's this play between, you know, warm and cool temperatures in there that are really, really nice. There is absolutely no white in there anywhere. You know, it's all, you know, there's very light value, but they all have a mixture of color in them. And it's again, you know, it's that play of that warm, cool, you know, in this particular painting. It's beautifully done. I mean, it's
Really nice.
yeah, I'd be really happy painting that.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, the flesh tones, again, you know, look at the range of value if you squint your eye down. You know, it tends to be generally all kind of mid-tone, and if you squint your eye, it all sort of just mushes into the fabric, right? It's, you know, it's very subtle. And the part that really pops, you know, in the whole painting is the hair against that, you know, pink kind of satiny fabric. And it just, you know, draws your eye right to, you know, that sort of triangle of her hand down to her elbow, back up to her shoulder, and the top of her head, and around again. And that's, you know, it just keeps pulling you in. So really nicely done. You know, one of my favorite paintings of his, that and the sail.
When Soraya went to Rokeby Hall to see the Toilet of Venus by Velasquez, he went with this well-known artist, Aureliano de Beiruete, and this is a portrait of the artist that he painted from life, one of his better known portraits. The only indication that Beiruete is an artist is the picture in the background on an easel. He's sitting there, his gloves still on, holding a hat, his coat just taken off, as if he's just come in from a walk. The style of the painting is similar to the style or in the tradition of Velasquez. And Soraya described the technique he used as for portraits as painting from inside out, never seeming to search for the outline or silhouette. You might contrast this with drawing the outline of the face first and then filling it in with color. What Soraya is saying is he does the opposite. He works from the inside of the face. He builds up the face, in other words, component by component, filling in and creating the personality as he paints. And a bit like Sargent, he's also used a reduced palette. Here he's using black, grey and beige to paint the picture. He painted this in 1902, and as I said, he became a famous artist around about 1900, and everybody wanted their portrait painted. It was a time when portrait painting had received a revival. It was, for an artist, the most lucrative and arguably, however, the most competitive genre. Although he painted a few portraits before 1900, portraiture quickly became his forte, his signature subject, along with beach scenes. This is a portrait of the American artist Ralph Clarkson. It was painted when Soraya went to Chicago, and he was received there as a famous artist, as the Prince of Painting, as he was called. He painted this portrait in just 2 hours, as did Velasquez. A spontaneous approach which enabled him to capture the person, the personality. He studied the old masters, in particular Velasquez, although he did feel that sticking too closely to their style would be detrimental. He said at one point about the old masters, painting isn't any use for painting today, to be honest. Although he did make an exception for the painting we can actually see in the background here for the great things, such as Las Meninas by the great Velázquez. Clarkson first saw Sorolla's work when he visited Madrid in 1891, but he didn't actually meet Sorolla until we think about 1900, when Clarkson was on the jury of the Paris Universal Exhibition. Remember, I said that Sorolla's Sad Inheritance won the Grand Prix prize. Well, Clarkson was on the jury that awarded the prize. And it was following that visit to Paris that Clarkson made a large copy of Velázquez Las Meninas when he returned to Chicago. And that's what you can see hanging on his studio wall behind him. This is a portrait of his wife and favorite model, Clotilde Garcia del Castillo, who he called my flesh, my life, my brain. She was his confidant, traveling companion, bookkeeper, and muse. And this portrait is set in their Madrid home. She's wearing a striking evening dress, and behind her is a painting by Sorolla of a female saint made that he painted during the first years of their marriage. And it can't be any coincidence that the halo around the saint's head is very close to being around the head of his wife. Now, it's worth taking an aside here to explain why it was owned by the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This was painted in 1906. In 1908, he exhibited in London, but he wasn't a success, not at all. He didn't sell many paintings. He got some bad critical reviews, no commissions, but he did meet a wealthy American patron, Archer Huntington, who invited him to exhibit the following year in New York. The exhibition in New York was a sensation. They were lined up round the block in the snow. 160,000 people visited in a month. He sold 195 paintings and received 25 portrait commissions, including being invited to the White House to paint President Taft. All the museums in America had to have a Sorolla, and that's when, after that exhibition, this painting was sold to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where it's still on display. Also, as a result of this success, he was commissioned to paint a series, a 60-meter mural painting, a series of paintings of Spanish costumes and customs. And it more or less occupied Sorolla for the rest of his life. It could be described as his ruin because of the effort it took out of him. A final take on this painting is that we have a photograph of Sorolla sketching the portrait of his wife before he starts the painting.
Okay. Seems to have frozen for some reason. I don't know why. Come on.
Incidentally, when
There we
he visited London, he did meet Johnson Sargent, and they became friends and friendly competitors. Critics were always comparing the two artists, comparing and contrasting them. In 1904, he painted this portrait of his three children. At that stage, the eldest in the red dress is 14-year-old Maria. 12-year-old Joachim is wearing the grey suit and the white cravat, looking like an adult dandy. And 9-year-old Eleanor seems bored by the whole painting session. Incidentally, X-ray analysis shows that he did paint his wife, Clotilde, in front of the children and later painted her out, perhaps to emphasize the children's independence. We can see elements of or references to Velázquez again in this painting. The edge of the canvas on the right is a reference to the canvas in Las Meninas. There is what appears to be a mirror in the background, as there also is in Las Meninas, all references that would have been picked up to the great Velázquez. Let's return to his other great passion, beach scenes. When he left London in 1908, he went back to Spain to paint scenes like this for America, the American exhibition. And this arguably is his most famous painting, Boys on the Beach, which is in the Prado. It's one of a number of reclining nudes on the beach that he painted from life with his easel at the water's edge. There are even traces of sand in many of his paintings. The painting itself is dated 1910, but we believe it was painted in the summer of 1909, when we know he stayed in Valencia between late June and late September that year. The composition combines the static pose of the boys resting on the beach with their dynamic alignment. The diagonal of the nearest boy takes our eye up to the horizontal second boy, and the movement is stopped by the third horizontal relaxed figure. It's a view looking downwards, so the horizon is very high. All we see is the swirling sea and sand. The figures occupy the whole canvas, and it involves us in the picture. The tones of the skin tones of the boys, we can see that he's picked up the lighter, whiter tones of the nearest boy, whose skin is dried, and the next boy has got slightly darker tones, a wetter body with the sea swirling around his feet. You can see the indentations in the sand created by the swirling water have just been captured by a few swirls of the brush. You also notice the reflection of the boy's body distorted by the undulations of the sand, and the contrast between that and the dark violet shadows underneath their bodies, indicating a fierce midday sun. This is the white boat, Harvia. It was painted in 1905 when Soraya had spent a summer holiday in Harvia, which is a coastal town about 100 kilometers from Valencia. He painted it from a high vantage point, possibly a nearby cliff. And you can see the boys are straining to pull in the boat. Their bodies are painted in a thick, creamy impasto that becomes translucent green under the water. The deep blue water surrounding them is a blue priming layer covered in dashes of emerald green, blue, turquoise, white and yellow. And the dark blue and turquoise in the foreground suggests that there are rocks underneath that the boys are holding on to pull in the boat. The boat, you could just make out the name. Its name is Rayo, meaning lightning, implying speed. All the following paintings are presented chronologically up to the end of his life, starting with Shadow on Alcantara Bridge, Toledo in 1906. The bridge, which spans the Tagus River across to Toledo, is a famous bridge. It was originally built by the Romans in 104 to 106 AD, although it has been destroyed and rebuilt many times since then. Sorolla visited Toledo a number of times, and he wrote, "If not Madrid, those of us who make painting our life should live here. There is nothing equal to it in Italy or Belgium." He loved the city. He painted many paintings, some 20 paintings of the city, mostly from unusual angles and viewpoints. I've given you a chance to look at this painting to make out what it is. So let me clarify. It's the underneath of the bridge, looking across the river. The golden arc on the left is the sunlight coming under one of the arches of the bridge. We see the diagonal cutting across the painting is the shadow of the bridge falling across the river, creating a powerful dark blue shape. At the bottom, the golden reflections are rocks that break up the shadow, and on the far side we see the rocks of the bank made up of strong vertical and horizontal brushstrokes of creams, pinks and violets. You can see from this painting that by 1906 he was becoming more and more experimental. It's when you first see it, it's not clear what you're looking at, that it's a reflection of the arch of the bridge across the water. But as soon as you realize what it is, it snaps into place. You'll also notice that his brushwork is becoming freer and freer. The following year, in 1907, he spent the summer at the Royal Palace of La Grandia to San Ildefonso. It's about 80 kilometers north of Madrid, and he was there to paint a portrait of the King and Queen. In between sittings, he painted his family playing in the garden, and this is the fountain of the snail, and he's painted his youngest daughter, the girl on the right, Eleanor, skipping around the fountain with her friends. It has spontaneity, a photographic spontaneity. He's captured her in midair skipping. The skipping rope is just a faint single line of white paint behind her. And
Okay, take a minute and look at the inset that he's put up, and look at the front of her face. I mean, there's really nothing there. You know, it's really just this vague, sort of suggestion, in both color and value that, that's the front of her face. And then he's got that little bit of light on her cheek. There is no eye, there's no mouth. There really isn't a nose. He hasn't put any real detail in there whatsoever. And yet, when you look at the painting overall, it reads, there's a girl there, the dress that she's wearing, and, you see the fabric moving. And even, with all the, let's call it supposed detail in the dress, there really isn't any. It's just a change of value, light and dark pattern. And yet it all kind of falls together. So you might want to make note of that, and maybe not get so wrapped around the axle about stuff as you're painting.
Dynamic strokes mimicking the girl's energy and skipping. The painting itself is alternately some thick paint strokes, and in places we can see the canvas behind the paint. which gives the painting a lot of energy. It's also, as I mentioned, something to do with photography, as before the snapshot, it's difficult to think someone would paint someone apparently floating in the air. But with the advent of the Kodak click and we do the rest camera, which were widely available in 1907. I think they were launched in something like 1885. And it's changed the way people viewed the world. So the girl floating in the air is clearly a snapshot of someone skipping. Another beach painting, 1908, Running Along the Beach, one of his famous works. In 1908, he travelled to London, and while he was there visiting an exhibition of his work at the Grafton Galleries, he went to the British Museum to study the Elgin marbles. And that's what we see here. This is a reference to the figures on the Elgin marbles. Their billowing draperies of the girls echo those of the figures in the Greek sculpture. The figures seem to fly across the margin between the sea and the sand, and the warm coloured sand contrasts with the colder blue of the sea. As I said before, his exhibition in London wasn't particularly successful, even though he was advertised as the world's greatest living painter. It wasn't an instant success. He didn't sell many works. As a consequence, the National Gallery in London, the Tate, the major galleries around the country don't have any Sorolla paintings. There are many in American museums, but not in Britain. And if Sorolla was discussed at all around the 1900s, it was as a comparison to his friend, fellow artist, John Singer Sargent. The following year, he painted Strolling Along the Seashore, one of his best known and iconic works. It was painted in Valencia in the summer of 1909, and it shows his wife Clotilde on the left and his eldest daughter Maria. Sorolla had just returned from his triumphant success in New York, Buffalo and Boston, and this painting reflects his bold, self-assured and refined style. He was, by this time, a mature artist in complete control. We see the pair walking casually along the beach, leaning slightly into the wind, which blows their clothes back behind them. And Sorolla has captured the soft, late afternoon sunlight. It's a daring photographic snapshot of the couple, a moment in time. You can see that by the way that Clotilde's hat is chopped off at the top, like a snapshot, a photographic snapshot, and the extra large expanse of sand at the bottom. The high viewpoint enabled him to eliminate the horizon, and in doing so, he can contrast the sea and the sand as a backdrop to the two figures. And in painting the figures, he's captured all of the nuances of white, the different shades of white, reflecting the yellows of the sand and the blue of the sea, contrasted with the darker coloured ribbons and flowers of the hat. The painting is then tied together, unified by the white line of surf at the top of the painting. This is The Drunkard Zerals, painted in 1910. As I mentioned previously, when he was in New York, he was commissioned to paint an enormous mural, altogether 210 square meters of wall, representing the costumes and customs of Spain, a project which occupied the rest of his life. He had, as we've seen, been painting light-toned paintings for many years, beaches and happy times, and he realized that he had to get back to painting peasant life, the ancient traditions, and employ darker colors to represent the dark power of Spanish painting. And he painted a whole series of dark Spanish scenes of working men enjoying themselves, sometimes perhaps a bit too much. Zarús is a small port, a small fishing village and seaside town in the Basque region on the northern coast near Bilbao. He spent a family holiday there in the town, and perhaps because of bad weather, he painted a number of scenes inside taverns, at least 4 of which are studies like this one of alcoholism. This was a serious problem because cider was abundant and cheap. This painting shows 4 people making fun of a local drunkard called Moscora. They're encouraging him to drink more cider. You can see that the hand in front of him is the chap to his right, to our left, who's thrusting a glass forward for him to drink. Another drunk with a red nose to the left looks hard at Sorolla. In between painting for the project, he painted beach scenes and his family. This is the siesta. He spent the summer of 1911 in the seaside town of San Sebastián in Spain's Basque region, and he stayed in the house of an old friend of his, and this was painted in the garden. It's a very large canvas, 2 meters square, which he took out onto the lawn of the garden and painted from life. And although it's not immediately obvious, it snaps into place. We can see that there are 4 women resting on the grass under the shade of the tree. Reclining across the painting is his wife, Clotilde. Behind her is their youngest daughter, Eleanor, apparently asleep, and a friend called Maria Teresa, who's a book publisher, and she's shown engrossed reading a book. And then further back on the right is their eldest daughter, Maria, her fingers playing with a wicker chair, all painted very loosely, extremely daring at painting. Some areas of the canvas are bare, others are thick impasto paint. Just to show you a close-up, you can see the dress is thick strokes of paint, and it's a mix of white, orange, pink, yellow and blue, sometimes painted wet on wet. The wet colour is painted on top of a colour that's already been painted, which is still wet. In the foreground it's a hat with a dark blue ribbon, which is suggested by just a few brush strokes. Sorolla travelled across Spain with a photographer to record local costumes for the mural he was working on in New York. This is Roncal Valley in the Pyrenees, in the Navarra region, which is centred on Pamplona. Unusually, we know the names of the models as they were written on the back of the photograph that was taken on the time. We know that on the left is Benita Daspar, dressed in a costume that identifies her as a single woman with her head covered. To her left is her aunt, Raimonda Monzon, who as a married woman is dressed in dark clothes. And the smart-looking man on the right is Jose Sanz, and his black cape with red trimmings shows that he's the mayor or a local councillor. The figures were used in the final mural, but not in this arrangement. They're used as part of a ceremonial procession shown entering a church. The costumes they're wearing were not costumes that by 1912 were regularly worn. Soraya had to bring the costumes himself, and the men and women modelled the clothes for him. And most of these images are life-size. He painted life-size images. The dress of the councilman particularly impressed Soraya. It had been unchanged since the Middle Ages. Soraya wrote to his wife, the men are especially magnificent in their outfits, a vision of Spain that is impressive, noble, and appealing. This is a few years later in 1906. It's called After the Bath, The Pink Robe. And he was engaged, deeply engaged in his project to paint the costumes and customs of ancient Spain for the Hispanic Society in New York. In order to take a break, to take a rest from this project, he spent the summer in Valencia painting the local area. And what we see here is the time he spent, the final few weeks of that summer in Valencia. And this was painted near the Malvarosa beach in Valencia. Soraya considered it a major work and one of the best I've ever produced. The two women have just returned from bathing and are in a beach hut. And the furthest woman from us is helping the one in pink to remove her wet robe. We feel as though we are witnessing an intimate moment normally hidden from view. And yet the triviality of the moment contrasts with the monumentality of the figures. I think it must be the deeply folded drapes, which reminds us of the Greek dresses and gives the painting a classical, timeless dimension. It's got the grandeur and stature of Greek sculpture, a permanence and a dignity. And we know that Soraya was deeply interested in ancient Greek sculpture. We see the sunlight streaming through the wicker walls, and behind the wall on the left, we can see the sea in the distance. He's captured the sun in shades of white as it comes through the walls, catching the curtain as it blows towards the women on the left. And we can see the bright streaks of sunlight dappling the drapery, their clothing on the two women. It's 1909, and Soraya had just finished the project for the Hispanic Society in New York. This particular painting was commissioned by a wealthy American known as the Tobacco King, and it could be a reference to the smuggling of tobacco. It's called The Smugglers. Now, originally we know from sketches that he painted or sketched the men transporting the goods by donkey over a rough path, but obviously he spotted this cliff face. He was on holiday in Ibiza at the time, and it caught his eye, and he shows us the smugglers climbing the cliff face. As he looks down, there's 4 of them. You can see 3 are near the top of the cliff, and there's a 4th much further down, halfway up the cliff. Interestingly, he felt he needed to place the figures on the left, so he needed to extend the canvas, and you can see the extension. The figure at the top of the cliff on the right, by his left foot, the foot on the right, you can see the join in the canvas that's been painted over in order to extend it to the right and leave the painting more balanced. The paint, of course, is applied very vigorously. There's the deep, intense blue of the sea reflected in the blue of the white of the men's shirts. In other words, the men's shirts are white, and that they are reflecting the blue of the sea. This is the final painting I'm going to cover, and we return to Sorolla's home in Madrid. It's called Garden of Sorolla's House with Empty Chair. He had travelled all over Spain, capturing what became known as his Vision of Spain series, a series of paintings that almost killed him with exhaustion, the difficulty, intensity, and constant travel between 1910 and 1920 led to him having a very serious stroke at this time, just after he painted this, and he never painted again. The stroke, he had the stroke when he was at home, and this is one of the last paintings he ever painted. You see the chair in which he often sat and painted, and he died 3 years later in 1923 and was buried like a Spanish state hero. His body was transported by cortege by train to Valencia, where thousands of people greeted it in his hometown, and he was buried with full state pomp. Let me just show you, let's finish with a picture, not in exactly the same view, but to show you what the garden's like today. His great project to record Spain for posterity was over. It was installed in New York in 1926, but by that stage, it was greeted with indifference. The world had changed. By the 1920s, when you thought of Spanish art, you thought of Dali, Miro, not of Sorolla. All of the decades following Sorolla has disappeared from view, and hopefully this short talk has, and the exhibition at the National Gallery in 2019 has helped to restore him to his rightful place in the history of Spanish art.
All right. Let's see. Oh, stop. There we go. All right. So stop share. Okay. Anybody out there still awake other than Richard?
I
I'm here.
thought it was great. I
Okay.
enjoyed it.
Good. Good. All right. I know it was kind of long, but Sorolla is one of those people who, if you really had to study a painter, he'd be a great one to study. You know, he really would. I mean, he's his composition, his use of paint, and just capturing sort of the light and the feel of the movement of a lot of the figures, things like that, were, you know, I mean, if you could get that much down in your painting, you'd be a real success. You know, personally, I mean, I haven't shown you Andre Zorn yet, and we will look at him fairly soon, but you know, I would say Sargent, Cecilia Beau, Sorolla, Zorn, you know, they're, you know, certainly some of my very favorite painters, you know, along with, you know, Voltan, and there's quite a few after that, but, you know, Hafsef Pushman, but, you know, just looking at some of these artists and what they did, what they accomplished during their lifetime, you know, the volume of work, the scale of the work, and, you know, how the paintings, you know, when you look at them today, you know, they still hold up, you know, in many ways. So, you know, they feel like, you know, when you look at them, it's kind of like you get a sense of who these people were, you know, and what was going on in their life. And I think that's really critically important, you know, because I think that's one of the values of painting over photography is that you get this sense of energy, you know, in the people who are painted, and the places. It really kind of gives you a sense of, you know, being there, and experiencing what the artist experienced. So, you know, fairly, you know, historically, you know, as a document, fairly important. Anybody got anything to say about his work, or have any questions about it, or anything like that? Crickets. Okay.
Don't everybody speak up at one time, right?
Yeah, let's not all talk at once, right? You know, I know.
Yeah, his later work seemed to be a little looser, not as defined as the earlier works.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that is, and you can see that happen in most artists, you know, as they work, you know, as they become more confident about their abilities as a painter or as an artist, they loosen up, and they get to this stage where, you know, where the mastery is the fact that they can take this wet, gushy sort of medium, you know, in different pigments, and very quickly kind of throw up there, you know, with some very gestural sort of brush strokes and things. And yet it comes out, you know, as this refined image, and still works. You know, that's one of the things, you know, when I stopped the video and I had you look at the painting with his daughter skipping, and, you know, looking at that face, you know, it wasn't a portrait, you know. I mean, he didn't, you know, bother to define any real features, you know, on her face. He gave you this impression, this suggestion, you know, that, you know, her head was there. And that was enough, you know. If he would have gone further, you know, it probably would have made the painting, you know, a little bit too fussy, and you know, and detracted, you know, from the whole painting. So that's something that comes with maturity, you know, as a painter, is knowing what to put in and what to leave out. You know, it's the one thing that I think all artists in the beginning and in their mid-career struggle with, which is, you know, we tend to put in too much, you know, and we overwork things rather than keeping it fresh and very direct, and, you know, just letting the viewer kind of fill in all of that, you know, in, you know, kind of superfluous detail that we don't really need. So at any rate, well, it's about 12 o'clock, and thank you all for coming. Before we go, Eloise, you got anything to say about any of that?
No, my exposure to European history of art is very limited, and I know they mentioned something about his association with Sargent, but I also could see his work was similar to Sargent's, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, he was actually older than Sargent, and I think, you know, both Sargent and Bow looked at his work extensively, you know. And they also mentioned, you know, the fact that Degas, you know, Degas would go in, you know, to some of these exhibitions, and he would stand in front of some of his paintings, literally, you know, for hours, and just look at it, and then make no comment, just turn around and walk out, you know. And I think the sense was, you know, it's kind of like, you know, I've seen Soroyo paintings and I've seen Cecilia Bowes paintings, and they both kind of have the same effect on me. You know, it's like when I walk in and I see them, it's just like, you know, how do they make it so simple and so strong and it just work like that? You know,
How
there's,
do you,
yeah, go ahead.
how do you make your own art captivating like that? Where
Right.
people will stand in front of it and just study it.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the beauty of Soroyo's work is, you know, obviously, you know, the color and the light, but it's also the brushwork. You know, when they use this word bravura, that's what they mean. You know, and when you look at Bow's work and when you see Soroyo's work, even some of Sargent's work, you know, particularly in the later stages, when Sargent was painting, they all had that bravura. It's just this ability to pick up a paintbrush, load it up with paint, and make a paint stroke, and make that thing read as what they wanted it to be, you know, and not futz with it, not go back and, you know, blend and soften it. Just, you know, here I'm putting down it's a hand, it's a arm, it's a, you know, just very, very direct and very simply, but it just came together. And they could do that over and over and over again, you know, and that's a thing that, you know, artists like myself struggle with, you know, because I'll put it down, but then I want to go play with it. You know, I want to futz with it some more. And you know, and they could just do it so simply and so fluidly. And when you step back, it all just sort of falls together and just becomes this beautiful painting, you know, and you understand exactly what's happening. And then when you walk up to the canvas and you're looking at it, it's just like this, you know, it looks like the biggest mess of, you know, just big, broad brush strokes and stuff and dripping paint here and there. And you see the paint surface and it doesn't look like anything. And then, like I said, you step back, you know, 8 to 10 feet, and it's just magically just comes right into focus. So, yeah. It's just time, you know, you got to do a lot of painting, you know, and eventually, you know.
I guess
You
it's too
kinda
late for some of us.
I don't think so. You know, I don't, you know, I don't believe that at all. You know, I mean, no matter where you are in life, you know, remember, you know, there are people like Grandma Moses. She didn't paint her first painting till she was 88. And look at what she accomplished, you know, in those 20 years. Because I think she lived to 106 or something like that. You know, and within that 26 years, she did such a huge volume of work that are, and never trained, you know, never took art classes or anything like that, never studied, you know, and never really studied, really up until her later life, really studied other artists. You know, she basically was working from her own experience and things. And you just look at the volume of work that she, you know, created and the beauty of it, you know.
So are you saying there's hope?
Yes, 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 absolutely. There's hope for all of us, you know.
Eloise, you've got some very nice things you've been doing. So
Oh, yeah.
So
there's
do
a lot
you,
of hope for you. A
John.
lot of hope for you.
So do you, John.
No, I mean, you know, and that's the thing, you know, we all, as an artist, we all have something to offer, because each and every one of us have this unique view of the world. We have our own experience. And no matter what we do, you know, no matter what we're painting, that's always going to be part of that work. It's going to show up in there, you know, and it's something that's visible. It's, you know, visible to anybody who looks, you know, at your work, you know, or take any time to actually view it. So, you know, yeah, don't ever feel like, just because I'm a certain age and, I've only been painting for 15 years that I'll never get, to a stage where, people will recognize my work. That's not true. At some point, and it may not be all of your work, but, there are going to be pieces that, people really pay attention to because you got something there. You said something that people can relate to. And, that's kind of what you hope for. So,
All right. Okay,
yeah.
John.
All right. Well, tomorrow I will be at Benson early in the morning, and we're going to do a painting class over there. And then we will not be online on Friday. Friday is Veterans Day. Okay. So the next time I see anybody on Zoom, it will be on Monday. Okay. So please make a note of
Alrighty.
that. All right.
Okay,
Have a good weekend.
okay,
Everybody.
good. Okay, thank you.
Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot. Thank you.
All right. Bye.